In 1929, a young Belgian cartoonist, Georges Remy, better known as Hergé, created a character called Tintin, who has become one of the most popular comic strip figures in the world. The 23 Tintin adventure books have been translated into 80 different languages and have sold 200 million copies worldwide. Opening shot took Harry Thompson, author of a best-selling book about Tintin, to the Hergé Foundation in Brussels to have a unique look through Hergé's original artwork and archives. Back in London, we asked some children why the Tintin characters remain some of the funniest around.
The most amusing thing about Tintin books, to me, would be, I suppose, the subtle humour of it all, the different characters created by Hergé.
I like it being in the past because you can actually relate to it with all the cars being old-fashioned.
Yeah, I think the funniest thing is the pictures because, like, how you can tell what their expressions are with the drawings. It's really good.
The success of the comedy really is partly in its timeless quality and partly its universal application. It's the kind of comedy you can understand anywhere from Africa to Europe. It's people's faces, it's people's reactions to things, it's things going wrong. Tintin himself began as a Boy Scout because Hergé was a Boy Scout troop of 20. Everybody was in Belgium in those days.
When did you give birth to Tintin?
It was in 1929. But before that, I created for a Boy Scout paper a little character called Totor.
And after about a year, he swapped him for a young reporter called Tintin. And here is the very first edition of the Petit 20e comic for kids with Tintin. It's Tintin's first adventure. He goes off to Moscow to biff a lot of communists in the jaw. And compared with what came later, it's pretty simple.
First, when I began, I had no idea. It was a game. It was just fun for me to tell a story, but I didn't know from week to week what would happen to my hero.
You can break the Tintin books down into sections quite easily. And when he started, they were very naive, very happy-go-lucky, not much plot, just a string of jokes. Because at that stage, he wasn't writing books. When it became clear how big it was, he wrote proper stories, and he ended up doing what was really political satire. And in the war, he goes into another type of comedy, which is character comedy, very escapist stuff, explorers, and that's when he brings in people like Haddock and Professor Calculus. And this goes on until around about the 50s, and it culminated in the Moon books. And then as he got older, he went into a much more reflective phase. And the final books are really seeing the world through Captain Haddock rather than Tintin. The adventures really happen to them rather than them going out and seeking.
I think the funniest thing about the Tintin books are the pictures, really, because they make them look really realistic and funny. My favourite book is probably Tintin in America, because I like Red Indians, and he is just good because after 3 or 4 pages it comes to life when you read it.
The early books, that's Russia, the Congo and America, which is sort of east, south and west, which is simple travelogues. They were really based on films, the kind of things Hergé would have seen in the cinema. So all the communists in the Russia book were grinning men with knives in their teeth, and all the natives in Africa had spears and hunted lions, and everyone in America was a Red Indian or a gangster. So they were very simplistic travelogues. They don't really stand the test of time. It really wasn't until Blue Lotus that he started to put everything together from the start as a proper constructed story. And here is the original cover illustration of the Blue Lotus. Here's how it came out in the 1936 edition. In those days, of course, the books were black and white. They didn't get into colour until the war, when he had a lot of time on his hands and went back and coloured them all. But they did come with colour plates, some of which were quite pretty. The Blue Lotus is a really important book, not just for Hergé, but for the whole of European comic strip art. Because up to that point, the readers of the magazine that Tintin was in were getting this sort of very primitive Tintin America type stuff. And he was about to take Tintin to China, and he said this in the magazine, in the Petit Vingtième. And he got a letter from the teacher to a group of Chinese students who said to him, whatever you do, please don't make China the Fu Manchu film version of China, pigtails and bird's nest soup and torturing babies. He said, please talk to my students and get a real picture of China. And so Chang Chon Ren was introduced to Hergé, and Hergé and Chang became really, really great friends. And Chang persuaded him to do masses and masses of research. So you see here there are drawings and drawings of furniture, of lanterns, of street scenes, of people. Every little detail is from the real China in 1934. Chang himself, of course, was an artist. So these pictures here are almost certainly drawn by Chang of the remarkable Chinese style of the tree and the steps down the mountainside. Chang taught him how to draw in ways that he hadn't known about before. He taught him Chinese techniques such as perspective and this clear line style, things that he hadn't really learned about before because he was self-taught largely. And these techniques were brought into Tintin by Hergé, and in turn they were copied by the whole of comic strip art in Europe in the 20th century. He valued his influence so much that he made Chang into a character in the book who saved Tintin's life.
This madman who has taken this drug gets this sword and says to Tintin, so I'm going to cut off your head.
The madman's got this funny swell around your head. When you first see him, you think that he hasn't gone for water for days.
Chang comes in and shoots off the head of the sword, and the madman cries because he's lost his sword.
Chang also politicized Hergé because it was Chang who taught Hergé all about the Japanese invasion of China, which the West was rather hushing up. Sometime before they attacked America in World War II. And it was through Chang that Hergé came to fill the book with anti-Japanese slogans, which got the Japanese government so annoyed.
The most interesting thing about the Blue Lotus was the way it educated people about the past. The way, for instance, the South Manchurian railway being blown up. And the way it involved opium dealings at the time, and the general hostility between China and Japan.
And for all this political satire and for all this careful research, I mean, the main thrust of the books is comic.
The story, of course, is absolutely important, the details and all the rest. But in the end, the unforgettable Captain Haddock, who is every bad child. Calculus, who is the school swot. Snowy, who is the disobedient baby. All these are characters that a child can recognize and enjoy.
Well, my favourite character is Snowy because he says like really rude things, and Tintin doesn't know because he can't hear what Snowy says because he's a dog.
One of my favourite bits is when he keeps being bumped into by people and he gets really annoyed, and then the cork lands on his back when someone's opening a champagne bottle.
Most of the books after the war have this great character comedy, and really it's all the things in Hergé's own life enshrined Tintin's friends, the Thompson twins, with the bowler hats and umbrellas. Well, Hergé's own father and his father's brother used to go around with bowler hats and umbrellas singing the whole time. So that's where they came from. And Bianca Castafiore, well, there's a strong suspicion that may have been Hergé's aunt, because every Sunday they used to have to go around to listen to her play the piano and sing at the top of his voice, and Hergé couldn't bear operatic songs after that.
The funniest character, I'd say, would have to be Professor Calculus. He takes everything totally seriously, but the problem with his deafness, it tends to make everything go completely mad.
There was this absent-minded professor he used to see in the street. He's determined to get an absent-minded professor like this into the books, and you see several absent-minded professors in the books until he finally hits on Calculus. And Haddock, in turn, is based on the man he used to write with at that time.
Captain Haddock, well, it's a lot of people I know, but it's a friend of mine. He looks to a certain Jacobs, who is a cartoonist in Belgium also. And he's just like Captain Haddock, full of movement and heartily, but bursting into invective, yes.
Captain Haddock is funny because of how he's like, gets angry so easily, and he's always like saying pirate things, and it's really funny.
And in Tintin in Tibet, when the Yeti gets drunk, he calls him your big buffoon and calls him funny names.
We had to get his two key phrases of blistering barnacles, which could be expanded into billions of billions blue blistering barnacles being barbecued, and his thundering typhoons, which could also be expanded. But I used some of the books on the shelf. Methuen did natural history books, so mammals of the world could provide things like odd-toed ungulate or cushion-footed quadruped. And it was quite ordinary ones, like a duck-billed platypus, but it sounds very good when roared by the captain.
The backgrounds, the settings, whether it's a town in India or the decks of a 17th century warship, all these characters are real individual ones. It's an astonishing mixture, and this is where I think his genius is at his best, of getting reality and then creating something on top of that reality.
10, 9, 8, go for main engine start, 7, 6. We have main engine start, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have SRB ignition, and the history's largest astronaut crew is on its way.
Houston controlling now. All main engines running at 100%. Maneuver to put the ship on its 57-degree inclination.
Hey, there's the Cape. It is clear today. Okay, here's what I want you to see.
The two moon books, Destination Moon and Explorers on the Moon, were absolutely the peak of Hergé's technical wizardry, because he decided to mount Tintin's expedition to the moon 19 years before the real thing.
I think it's good because Neil Armstrong obviously hadn't landed on the moon. It's fun to see the way they imagine the suits, where it's not actually like normal suits, it's like swimming suits.
Everything is fairly true to life, like gravity on the moon's surface and oxygen. It's quite exciting.
Okay, Crip, we're going LOS, and we won't be talking to you until Vandenberg at 9+30. We'd like you to dump tank A down to 70%.
When the captain goes for a glass of whiskey, the whiskey in the glass forms itself into a ball. Now that was a piece of scientific theory he based that on, which was way, way ahead of its time.
And he consulted Alexander Ananoff, who's a professor who's written this book, Astronautique, and he was very influential on Hergé's planning. And Hergé designed, having consulted the professor, he designed this rocket. It was nuclear-powered, and apparently it almost certainly would have worked, apart from one tiny little detail, and there was a mistake in the propulsion system that Patrick Moore noticed when he was sent plans to check over. And The main reason Hergé built this model was because he was very, very keen by this stage in doing his books, plotting them like cinema films. So what he wanted to do, him and his assistant Bob Demore, who did the book, what they wanted to be able to do is see any stage, any part of the rocket from any other section, so that they could just get any shot they liked. They could have somebody by this wall, by that wall, and wherever they wanted to take them from, they could. So if they had a man over here, then they could take this section out and just shoot, as it were, across this way. And he and Bob Demore worked on these books for 4 years and were extremely careful to get everything right. But one mistake they made, sadly, was that they forecast there would be ice on the moon. Destination Moon particularly is a very, very technical book. It's full of scientific explanation, which makes it his driest work in many ways. But he leavened that with some of the funniest stuff he's ever written, particularly when Professor Calculus completely loses his memory and is goaded back to sanity by Captain Haddock calling him a goat.
There's a funny bit where Thompson and Thompson grow loads of hair and it keeps on growing and they have to cut it every 5 seconds or so.
When he'd finished the Moon books, I mean, he'd really taken the action-adventure exploring thing to its limits. He couldn't go anywhere else. And he was becoming a little unhappy in his personal life with the pressure of this great success, because everyone was on to him to do the next big adventure, etc. And he was having these disturbed dreams, very white dreams, and he decided to draw his unhappiness out in a book. And that's when you get this incredible abrupt change to Tintin in Tibet.
Well, they are, all are my children, of course, but one of them I prefer perhaps a little more because it's called Tintin au Tibet. It's a story without weapons, without violence, just a story, I should say a love story, but it's a friendship story, just that.
It was very, very dear to him, the Tibet book, I think for 2 reasons. One was the character Chang, who had been his boyhood friend, and this is a classic story of lost and found. The other thing, of course, is the mystical element in Tibet. It's not a straightforward, earthy story at all, and that side of Hergé, which doesn't come out a great deal, certainly comes out in Tibet.
The interesting thing about this book is that he divests himself of all the slapstick, that Thompson twins aren't even in it, and Professor Calculus vanishes very, very soon, and it's really just Tintin and Haddock in the mountains on their own. You can see by this time that the techniques he was using have developed considerably since the pre-war books. I mean, for instance, this cover here, he's doing several different versions of everything. So Snowy appeared 3 times in different possible positions before we see what finally came about. And what he was doing at this stage was doing a lot of life drawing where he would pose, or his assistants would pose, and they would actually capture the precise physical position of a person. If you see, for instance, this rather interesting picture of Captain Haddock getting a rock on the back of his rucksack, you can see the pictures that have been drawn of Hergé himself, taking up the position, and then several different versions on the page of Haddock in the final position before we see how it came out. The degree of detail you've got here shows that you're not really dealing with a cartoonist. I mean, Hergé is not a cartoonist, he's a comic artist, which is a different thing altogether. I mean, he was doing very, very careful line drawings. The only cartooning involved is the face, which is the caricature. And yet, you can see, interestingly, that he does have sometimes the cartoonist technique when it comes to the humour. For instance, there's a very interesting one here of Haddock running up an airport gangway, and he's got something in his eye, and he can't see that the plane isn't on the other end of it. And originally, Hergé draws the frame where Haddock falls off the gangway. But in fact, the true cartoonist wouldn't put that frame in, and Hergé divests himself of that frame. You just see Haddock running up the gangway, and then cut immediately to him with covered in bandages and plasters, which is a real cartoonist way of doing things. All the later Tintin books were begun in Tintin magazine, and you can see quite often differences between the magazine version and the book version. A lot of it was redrawn. For instance, this opening shot of the Swiss Alps vanishes mysteriously from the book form. But very often there are clues to the magazine origins of these stories in the books. For instance, if you look here at the bottom of page 8, every 2 pages there's a cliffhanger because the people who were reading the magazine had to be made to buy next week's issue. And the bottom of page 8 here we can see the car is about to hit the drawing pin. It's one of the less subtle cliffhangers he did. And then at the top of the next page, page 9, you see the beginning of the next week's episode when the car whizzes past the drawing pin. Hergé liked to get a lot of topical references in, and in Teaching Tibet, the Abominable Snowman is just that kind of thing. He based his Yeti initially on King Kong. Who'd been to Tibet, he talked to a lot of people who knew something about the subject. He came up with a conclusion that the Abominable Snowman was actually a very friendly character.
I think he's just lonely, and in the end it's quite sad when they take Chang home, and he sort of is a bit lonely. I think he was only keeping him there because he wanted a friend, and he saved him from the snow and the blizzard. So I think he is quite good at heart.
And here, in fact, is the last page of the book in all its various stages. You can see the very, very rough early sketches. Then he's done a slightly more detailed one here, doodled all over it. As I said, he was mainly interested in the figures. You can see he's drawn every figure several times. And his assistants come in and draw the background. So here, Hergé would have drawn the Yeti, and the assistants would have done the mountains in the background.
All the placing of frames in a page, the dialogues also, that's my work. All the characters are drawn by myself. Then afterwards come my assistants with the backgrounds. But the characters, I want to draw them myself.
By this time, he's getting more and more cinematic. So you see a lot more close-ups. You see that he's beginning to plot the scenes, not just with life models, but also he would draw the scenes from above, like a room. And he would look at it like as if he was a film director, how each shot would link into the next shot. And this comes more and more in the later you go. So something like Flight 714, for instance, is very cinematic. It looks like a storyboard for a film. And if you look at this sequence here, the sense of movement he gets when the plane tries to land on a tiny prefabricated airstrip is quite remarkable. It looks simple on the page, but this is just a perfect example of how to draw in bande dessinée style, how to draw movement.